Hi everybody. So we talked about how God had done mighty miracles to bring his people, the Israelites, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Hebrews, to bring that group of people out of Egypt so that they didn't have to endure being slaves anymore, and they could go to the land of promise that God had promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and all of them. So last week we heard how they came through the Red Sea, how he opened it up and the people walked through, and then he brought it back down again so that the Egyptian army would never be able to take them captive again. So after God's victory over the Egyptians at the Red Sea, the Israelites had to travel through a wilderness. Now, last week you heard how God chose to take them from Egypt here, down through the wilderness, and then up to the promised land of Canaan instead of going the short route like this, because in this area up here there were people that were very violent, and they would have made war against the Israelites. They wouldn't have let them walk through their land without war, and they did not have the faith necessary in God to be able to endure war. After having just escaped being slaves in Egypt, they didn't have a close enough relationship with God. They didn't know enough about him. Their faith wasn't strong enough. So he was going to take them down through the wilderness and then back up to avoid war. Unfortunately, the wilderness was not a pleasant place. It was barren. There weren't things growing there. It was hot. It was sandy. It was a desert. And so there they were, walking through the desert. They were free. They had gold and silver and jewels and beautiful clothing that the Egyptians had given them. They had all their animals. They had their children. They had their grandparents. Everybody had been able to go. So they had many good things, many blessings, and they had seen miracles of God. But as they walked through that hot, dusty desert, they tended to forget the good things that they had. They forgot how they would have wished for those things not long before. And they started to think about how lovely it was back in Egypt when they didn't have to walk through the desert. Well, they walked for 3 days after they left the Red Sea, and their water was running out and they were getting thirsty, and they started to complain. They were getting grumpy, and then in the distance, what did they see? Somebody saw water. Oh, they were so excited. So they went, I'm sure they went running to get to this water. They were so excited, and the first ones got down to drink the water, and oh, it was horrible. What kind of water is that? It was bitter. It would have made them sick. They knew they couldn't drink it. Here they were, so hot and thirsty, like the hottest day in the summer, and here was water. It looked like it was cool and refreshing, but they couldn't drink it. Well, now they were really grumpy. They were really mad, and they started to complain to Moses. They got angry at Moses. And so Moses prayed, as he always did when there was trouble, and God showed Moses a certain tree. And Moses cut down the tree and threw it into this body of water, which they had called Marah, which means bitter. And then he said, you can go ahead and drink it now. God had done a miracle. And so the people were able to drink the water. It was sweet. It was healthy. It wasn't going to make them sick. They called it healed. They said the water had been healed. Well, the significance of this situation, of this miracle, was God can take things that are bitter and make them sweet. He can change things. So he can take a person who is hard to get along with and bitter and always complaining and grumpy, like those Israelites trudging through the hot sands, and God can make them sweet and thankful and hopeful. God can take difficult situations like that one they were in, and he can make it sweet. We all go through difficult times, and he can take those things and make them useful in some way, or at least give us strength to go through them and build our faith in him. Also, when Moses cut down the tree, that could be a sign of the tree that was cut down so that Jesus could die on the cross for our sins. By him doing that, we can all be saved. We can all have the everlasting water like Jesus offered to the woman at the well when he was on earth, because of the sacrifice he made on the tree. So the tree was cut down and thrown in the water, and then the water became sweet. So there's different things you can think about regarding this miracle. You'll find that throughout all the stories of the Israelites going through the wilderness, there is hidden significance in them, if you can think about them and find them in relation to the rest of the Bible. Well, God spoke to Moses at this time, and he said that this situation was a testing. God wanted to prove the Israelites. Going through the wilderness was a time for them to build their faith in God, but it was also a time for God to test the Israelites and see how they were doing. They were learning how to live with God and worship him, and he was testing them to see how they were doing with this. And I'm afraid they didn't do too well at that test. They were complaining. But God said to Moses to tell the people, if you will carefully listen to my word and obey the voice of the Lord, then, if you do that, then I will put none of the plagues on you that I put on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord that healeth you. So he's saying, I'm going to help you and not hurt you if you will carefully listen to and obey my word. This was going to be their test through all their time there in the wilderness. Well, they moved on from Marah, and they came to a place called Elim. Elim was much better. So here we have our map. I'll try and get it so you can see it. And they had left Egypt up here, and they had come down. They crossed the Red Sea here, and they came to Marah, and then they came to Elim. Now, Elim was a nice place. It had water, which was good water to drink. In fact, there was 12 springs or wells of water there for the people. And there was 70 palm trees to shade them. And there they were able to rest for a while and enjoy this nice place in the middle of the desert. So God brings us rest and blessings into our souls as well. He was leading these people, and he loved them, and he wanted to do what was good for them. So he was giving them a time of rest, and God does that for us as well. Psalm 23, many of you already know it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It talks about how God takes care of us in that psalm, just like a shepherd takes care of his sheep. So they stayed there at Elim for a while, and then they moved on. Remember, God was guiding them using a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So when the cloud or fire moved, they moved too. So the cloud moved on, and they moved on. And they came to the wilderness of Sin. And that is farther down on the path here, coming down towards the two fingers of the Red Sea, coming down into the wilderness. And once again, they got angry at Moses and Aaron. They're not doing too good at their tests. So they got angry at Moses and Aaron this time, and they were tired, they were hungry, and they were like, would to God we had died in Egypt, where at least we had lots of meat and we could eat bread until we were full. You brought us out here to starve to death. So here, they value food more than freedom. They forgot their slavery and their horrible lives in Egypt, and all they could think about was bread to eat and meat. And they started complaining, and complaining is contagious. I don't know if you ever noticed that, but once one person starts complaining, then another person starts complaining. It kind of is very catchy. It's like a catchy disease, complaining is. So all the people started complaining, or most of them. Here's hoping there were some people that didn't. They had already forgotten God's power and his miracles and his blessings and his love. They had forgotten. They forgot how they had cried out to God to save them while they were in Egypt. So God told Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven, and I will prove them whether they will obey me or not. This is going to be a real test. He was going to give them a test to see if they would obey. So Moses told the people God's word. He said, this evening, the Lord will provide you meat. They wanted bread and meat. This evening, the Lord will provide you meat. And in the morning, you will see the glory of the Lord when he gives you bread to eat until you're full. The Lord has heard your complaining, and your complaining is not against Aaron and against me. Your complaining is against God, because we're just his messengers for you. So Moses told the people this, and sure enough, then the glory of the Lord appeared in that cloud that was leading them. And God spoke to them out of the cloud, and he said, I have heard your murmuring, and I will give you meat, and you will be filled with bread. You will know that I am the Lord your God. So, that evening, God sent thousands of quail, birds to the camp so that the people could catch them and eat them for meat. So God supplied for them that evening. And then the next morning when they woke up, the ground was covered in white stuff, and it wasn't snow in the desert. It was round, and it was white, and it was sweet like honey on bread. And it covered the ground all over. And Moses told the people, you can go out and gather it and eat it. And so they gathered it up. Each family gathered their own food, and they ate it, and they ate as much as they wanted until they were full. And they called it manna because in their language, manna means, what is it? They looked out, what is it? And so it was called manna. And Moses called it bread from heaven. Also, in another place in the Bible, it calls it angel's food. Oop, I wrote sideways. Here we go. Okay, so they gathered all they needed for the day. Every morning when they went out, there was more manna for them to gather and eat that day. Now, when God said he was going to test them to see if they would obey him, listen to him, he was talking about the rules he gave concerning the manna. So there was 2 rules. The first rule was you go out every day and you gather as much as you want to eat that day, but don't save any till tomorrow. That was the first rule. Just gather enough for one day, not for 2. And then the next rule was on Friday, gather enough for 2 days. Because the next day is the day of rest. They weren't supposed to work on the day of rest. When God created the world, he worked for 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th after his work was done. And so they were not supposed to work on the 7th day, the Sabbath. Those were the 2 rules. Did everyone obey these rules? How did they do on their test? Well, they gathered the food. They were happy to gather it and eat it. But some people, maybe they were thinking, it's not going to come tomorrow. I don't believe God's going to send any tomorrow. I'm going to put some in this extra pot. No one needs to know, but I'll just hide it under the bed. And then they went and looked at it. Oh, the next day it was gross. It stank so bad, and there was worms in it. Oh, nasty. Nobody wanted to eat that. So they found out they definitely needed to obey God and not try and save any of that manna for the next day. Well, those people probably were a little hesitant to follow the next rule, because the second rule was on Friday you're supposed to gather enough for 2 days and save some for the next day. They're like, yeah, I tried that already. I don't know if I want to listen to that one. So some people, whether they were lazy, whether they were afraid, they did not gather the food for the second day. So they went out on Saturday morning looking for their manna, and oh, there's nothing there. God did not send manna on Saturday, so they were hungry on the second day there. They didn't have anything to eat. But the people that did follow the Lord's rules and they gathered twice as much on Friday, their manna did not get stinky and wormy. It was perfectly good to eat the next day because that was God's will for them. So, this manna, It was like bread. And it also is a picture of things that we know in the New Testament, things that happened later. When Jesus came to earth, he called himself the bread of life. Bread is food, and if we eat food, we stay alive. If we don't eat food, then we die. So the bread, in a way, gives life, and Jesus called himself the bread of life. What kind of life? Well, he can give us spiritual life. He wasn't really talking about the life that we live in our flesh, like being alive, our heart beating and our being able to breathe and all that kind of thing. He was talking about spiritual life, the inner soul part, where we can worship God and understand things on a different level, the kinds of things that are in the Bible, the things that we need to know to live forever. And that was the other kind of life he was talking about, everlasting life. After our bodies die, we can live forever. We do live forever, but if we choose to have faith in Jesus and his sacrifice for us on the cross, if we choose to believe in him as the Son of God, then he can be that life for us forever. We will live forever in heaven. We accept his gift of salvation. We live forever in heaven. And we can also get life on a daily basis, spiritual life, just like they went out and got the manna every day, and they couldn't save it for tomorrow. They had to gather every day, pretty much. Then we also can get food for our spiritual life, for our inner self, when we read the Bible. The Bible is called the bread of life too. And so we can read the Bible and get spiritual life. And Jesus is the way that we can have everlasting life forever. Just like the manna kept the Israelites alive in the desert, we can have spiritual life here on earth and everlasting life in heaven through Jesus Christ and his word. So that is all I have for you today. And next week we will hear more about the journeys of the Israelites through the wilderness. Thanks.